Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another video and today's topic is this: the truth about your Scofield Bible. If you are a dispensationalist, chances are that you are very well acquainted with the Scofield Reference Bible, either by just hearing people talk about it or because you personally own one yourself. Today, I want to share with you some information that you may not know about the Scofield Bible, both about the Bible itself and about the author, Cyrus Scofield. When it comes to reading and studying a reference Bible, at least in my opinion, it's very important that you know that the character of the person who wrote it is above reproach. And unfortunately, that is not something that Cyrus Scofield could have ever claimed. Cyrus Scofield, the author of the Scofield Reference Bible, he was a criminal. First of all, he wasn't even a trained theologian. And, I'm not one to really put much stock in letters behind people's names, but he was not a trained theologian. He was a lawyer, and he he was up to a lot of shenanigans all the time. He defrauded his mother-in-law of all of her money. He was in prison. I'm not sure how many times. I believe it was either once or twice for forgery. I believe that he also got in trouble for perjury. He also was a drunkard, and he left his wife and family and did not support them and ran around with two other women. And finally, his wife ended up having to ask him for a divorce because he refused to support them, to give them any money. And this was at a time when women did not get any sort of financial support from their husband if they were separated or if they were divorced. So chances are that she was probably destitute. And he was at this point in time, because yes, while he was doing these things, he was writing this Scofield Reference Bible. And after this was actually published, he received a lot of royalties from it. He became, rather wealthy from the royalties of this Scofield Bible because it was distributed so widely. And I'm just going to add in here that the Rothschilds were behind that. They were actually behind the commissioning of the Scofield Reference Bible. They had ties to the Oxford University publisher that published the Scofield Bible, and they had a hand in making sure that this Scofield Bible was just distributed widely throughout the United States, throughout the Moody Bible Institutes, throughout the seminaries. So yes, he had a large sum of money from this book, and he still abandoned his wife and his daughters. And we can read a little bit about him here. Cyrus Ingerson Scofield was an American theologian, minister, and writer whose best-selling annotated Bible popularized futurism and dispensationalism among fundamentalist Christians. I want to go back here to this picture because I want to show you that he has the letters DD behind his name, I believe that means doctorate in divinity. Okay, so it says here that this was edited by the Reverend C.I. Scofield. So a Reverend C.I. Scofield with a doctorate in divinity. So just keep that in mind as we read a little bit about him. I'm just going to skip ahead in the article to the pertinent portion. I always leave the links in the description for all of the articles that I read in my videos. So if you ever want to go take a closer look, just go in my description box and you will find the links for all of these articles there. But let's read this section here. In 1866, he married Leontine Lebeau Serre, I'm probably saying that wrong, a member of a prominent French Catholic family in St. Louis. Scofield apprenticed in the law office of his brother-in-law and then worked in the St. Louis assessor's office before moving to Atchison, Kansas in late 1869. In 1871, Scofield was elected to the Kansas House of Representatives, first from Atchison for 1 year and then from Nemaha County for a second. In 1873, he worked for the election of John J. Ingalls as senator from Kansas, and when Ingalls won, the new senator had Scofield appointed U.S. District Attorney for Kansas, at 29, the youngest in the country. Nevertheless, that same year, Scofield was forced to resign under a cloud of scandal because of questionable financial transactions, which may have included accepting bribes from railroads, stealing political contributions intended for Ingalls, and securing bank promissory notes by forging signatures. It is possible Scofield was jailed on forgery charges, although there is no extant evidence in the public records. Perhaps in part because of his self-confessed heavy drinking, Scofield abandoned his wife and 2 daughters during this period. Leontine Serre Scofield divorced him on grounds of desertion in 1883, and the same year Scofield married Hetty Hall von Wartz, with whom he eventually had a son. So, not exactly the type of person that I would entrust to writing a reference Bible. According to Scofield, he was converted to evangelical Christianity through the testimony of a lawyer acquaintance. Certainly by the late fall of 1879, Scofield was assisting in the St. Louis evangelistic campaign conducted by Dwight L. Moody, and he served as the secretary of the St. Louis YMCA. Significantly, Scofield came under the mentorship of James H. Brooks, pastor of Walnut Street Presbyterian Church, St. Louis, a prominent dispensationalist premillennialist. I want to point out here the years here. So he was, by 1879, he was assisting in the evangelistic campaign conducted by Dwight L. Moody, but he was divorced in 1883. So we know that in 1879, he very likely was, well, not conducting himself as he should have been. In October 1883, same year that he was divorced, Scofield was ordained as a Congregationalist minister. And I just want to point out he was divorced for abandoning his wife and family and not supporting them, while his divorce was proceeding but not yet final, and he accepted the pastorate of a small mission church founded by that denomination, which became the first Congregational Church of Dallas, Texas, now Scofield Memorial Church. The church grew from 14 to over 500 members before he resigned its pastorate in 1895. In 1895, Scofield was called as pastor of Moody's Church, the Trinitarian Congregational Church of East Northfield, Massachusetts. Scofield also attempted, with limited success, to take charge of Moody's Northfield Bible Training School. So I'm sure that many of you have heard of Moody Bible colleges. Well, he apparently hired Scofield, with his background, to pastor at one of his churches. During the early 1890s, Scofield began styling himself the Reverend C.I. Scofield, D.D., but there are no extant records of any academic institution having granted him the honorary Doctor of Divinity degree. So he labeled himself as a Reverend with as a Doctor of Divinity. Scofield's second wife proved a faithful companion and editing assistant, but his relationships with his children, including librarian Abigail Scofield Kellogg, were distant at best. I wonder why. Scofield died at his home on Long Island in 1921. And I'm just going to read the religious significance here. Scofield's Correspondence Bible study course was the basis for his reference Bible, an annotated and widely circulated study Bible first published in 1909 by Oxford University Press. Scofield's notes teach futurism and dispensationalism, a theology advanced in the early 19th century by the Anglo-Irish clergyman John Nelson Darby, who, like Scofield, had been trained as a lawyer. Dispensationalism emphasizes the distinctions between the New Testament church and ancient Israel of the Old Testament. Scofield believed that between creation and the final judgment, there are 7 distinct eras of God's dealing with humanity, and that these eras are a framework around which the message of the Bible can be explained. It was largely through the influence of Scofield's notes that dispensational premillennialism became influential among fundamentalist Christians in the United States. And these notes became a significant source for popular religious writers such as Hal Lindsey, and he wrote The Late Great Planet Earth. And indeed, I believe that he made a false prophecy about the rapture. He was one of a string of dispensationalists who publicly made false prophecies about either the rapture or the end of the world. Scofield had a significant influence on the Christian Zionist movement. In the Scofield Bible, he wrote that anti-Semitism was a sin. Citing Genesis 12:3, "I will bless them that bless thee," Scofield argued that the man or nation that lifts a voice or hand against Israel invites the wrath of God. Again, I want to point out here that in Genesis 12:3, God was talking to Abram, not to Israel. That was to Abram. And yeah, so I'm just going to remind you what I said earlier, that this Bible was funded by a Zionist movement. Many people say it was the Rothschilds who funded this Bible. They were also the ones who helped to fund the creation of the nation state of Israel in 1948. And so it would kind of make sense that they're going to fund a study Bible that is friendly to their Zionist causes. I found this pretty long article the other day about Cyrus Scofield and the Scofield Bible, and as you can see, it's long, so I'm going to read pretty much of it to you, but I'm not going to read everything. And I don't agree with everything that the author says, but I will leave a link in the description for any of you who do want to read it in its entirety. I'm going to start reading right here. A worse attack on America was to commence near the turn of the 20th century. This was the onset of an attack on American Christianity that continues unabated against the traditional Christ-following church. This attack, which author Gordon Ginn calls the final apostasy, began with a small, very wealthy, and determined European political movement. It had a dream, and the American churches stood in its way. The World Zionist movement, as its Jewish founders called themselves, had plans to acquire a homeland for all Jews worldwide, even though most were far from homeless, and many did not want another home. Not any land would do. World Zionists wanted a specific property that American Christians called the Holy Land. But if these Zionists read Democracy in America or any of the journals of any of America's churches, which no doubt they did, they could not help but know that Jerusalem was not theirs to have. As self-proclaimed Jews, they were, according to the Christian New Testament, the persecutors of Christ and most of his early followers, and the engineers of his crucifixion. America's traditional churches in the 19th century would never stand for a Jewish occupation of Jesus' homeland. World Zionist leaders initiated a program to change America and its religious orientation. One of the tools used to accomplish this goal was an obscure and malleable Civil War veteran named Cyrus I. Scofield. A much larger tool was a venerable, world-respected European book publisher, the Oxford University Press. The scheme was to alter the Christian view of Zionism by creating and promoting a pro-Zionist subculture within Christianity. And I think that you can see from the size of dispensationalists today that it worked very, very well for them. Scofield's role was to rewrite the King James Version of the Bible by inserting Zionist friendly notes in the margins, between verses and chapters, and on the bottoms of the pages. The Oxford University Press used Scofield, a pastor by then, as the editor, probably because it needed such a man for a front. The Revised Bible was called the Scofield Reference Bible, and with limitless advertising and promotion, it became a best-selling Bible in America and has remained so for 90 years. The Scofield Reference Bible was not to be just another translation, subverting minor passages a little at a time. No, Scofield produced a revolutionary book that radically changed the context of the King James Version. It was designed to create a subculture around a new worship icon, the modern state of Israel, a state that did not yet exist, but which was already on the drawing boards of the committed, well-funded authors of world Zionism. One thing that I want to point out, I just watched a really good video just before recording this, and it was actually about dispensationalism, and I'll put it in the description in case any of you want to watch it. I actually just shared it in my community page, and in that he made the point of saying that these study notes that Scofield put in this Bible they were very, very helpful for those who were new Christians. They would have a hard time reading the language of the King James because it was an older English. So many times they would depend solely on Scofield's notes because they were written in a more modern English, a language that they would better understand. So that is very troubling. Scofield's support came from a movement that took root around the turn of the century, supposedly motivated by disillusionment over what it considered the stagnation of the mainline American churches. Some of these reformers were later to serve on Scofield's editorial committee. Scofield imitated a chain of past heretics and rapturists, most of whose credibility fizzled over their faulty end times prophecies, like Hal Lindsey that I just mentioned earlier. His mentor was one John Nelson Darby from Scotland, who was associated with the Plymouth Brethren and who made no less than 6 evangelical trips to the U.S., selling what is today called Darbyism. It is from Darby that Scofield is thought to have learned his Christian Zionist theology, which he later planted in the footnotes of the Scofield Reference Bible. It is possible that Scofield's interest in Darbyism was shared by Oxford University Press, for Darby was known to Oxford University. I also want to point out here that John Nelson Darby, many people believe, and it seems to be true, that John Nelson Darby actually got the secret rapture ideology from a 15-year-old Scottish girl named Margaret MacDonald, who claimed that she had a vision about it. So that is actually where the secret rapture comes from. The Oxford University Press owned the Scofield Reference Bible from the beginning, as indicated by its copyright, and Scofield stated he received handsome royalties from Oxford. Oxford's advertisers and promoters succeeded in making Scofield's Bible, with its Christian Zionist footnotes, a standard for interpreting scripture in Judeo-Christian churches, seminaries, and Bible study groups. Even today, this Scofield Reference Bible, if it is not specifically used in the seminaries, it is already permeating all of their resources. This is through so many evangelical Christian seminaries. That is why it's everywhere. It has been published in at least 4 editions since its introduction in 1908 and remains one of the largest selling Bibles ever. Scofield's notes weave parts of the Old and New Testaments together as though all were written at the same time by the same people. This is a favorite device of modern dispensationalists who essentially weigh all scripture against the unspoken and preposterous theory that the older it is, the more authoritative. In many cases, the Oxford references prove to be puzzling rabbit trails, leading nowhere, simply diversions. Scofield's borrowed ideas were later popularized under the labels and definitions that have evolved into common usage today: premillennialism, dispensationalism, Judeo-Christianity, and most recently, the highly political movement openly called Christian Zionism. Thanks to the work of a few dedicated researchers, much of the questionable personal history of Cyrus I. Scofield is available. It reveals he was not a Bible scholar as one might expect, but a political animal with the charm and talent for self-promotion of a Bill Clinton. Scofield's background reveals a criminal history, a deserted wife, a wrecked family, and a penchant for self-serving lies. He was exactly the sort of man the world Zionists might hire to bend Christian thought, a controllable man and one capable of carrying the secret to his grave. There is little reason to believe that Scofield knew or cared much about the Zionist movement, but at some point he became involved in a close and secret relationship with Samuel Untermeyer, a New York lawyer whose firm still exists today and one of the wealthiest and most powerful world Zionists in America. Untermeyer controlled the unbreakable thread that connected him with Scofield. They shared a password and a common watering hole, and it appears that Untermeyer may have been the one who provided the money that Scofield himself lacked. Scofield's success as an international Bible editor without portfolio and his lavish living in Europe could only have been accomplished with financial aid and international influence. The most convincing evidence of the unseen Zionist hand that wrote the Scofield notes to the Venerable King James Bible is the content of the notes themselves, for only Zionists could have written them. These notes are the subject of this paper. Oxford edited the former 1945 edition of the Scofield Reference Bible in 1967 at the time of the Six-Day War when Israel occupied Palestine. The new footnotes to the King James Bible presumptuously granted the rights to the Palestinians' land to the State of Israel and specifically denied the Arab Palestinians any such rights at all. One of the most brazen and outrageous of these newly inserted footnotes states, "For a nation to commit the sin of anti-Semitism brings inevitable judgment." And this is page 19 and 20, footnote 3 to Genesis 12:3. This statement sounds like something from Ariel Sharon, or the chief rabbi in Tel Aviv, or Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism. But these exact words are found between the covers of the 1967 edition of the Oxford Bible that is followed by millions of American churchgoers and students and is used by their leaders as a source for their preaching and teaching. And it gives many other examples here. I'm not going to keep reading because I'm just fully expecting that YouTube is going to censor this video, but you can read through the rest of this article yourself. It gives all of the, well, not all of them, it gives many of the footnotes that have been added that are extremely troubling and extremely unbiblical. But unfortunately, this is something that dispensationalist churches completely embrace, and it's almost as if they consider the study notes of the Scofield Reference Bible to be just as inspired as the Bible itself. And you and I know that is not the case. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below. And if you like my work and would like to become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.